This is my last attempt to warn you about your soulmate life, your soulmate getting scammed by. My beloved child. This is my last attempt to warn you about what is happening in your soulmate's life, because something they believed was harmless has quietly become much more serious. Your soulmate is being scammed, but not in the obvious way you might imagine. No stranger suddenly appeared demanding money. No suspicious message arrived promising impossible riches. This began with trust. Someone entered their life slowly, studied what they were worried about, learned what they desperately wanted to fix, and then presented themselves as the one person who could help. At first, your soulmate questioned them. Something felt slightly wrong. But every time doubt appeared, this person had the perfect explanation ready. And recently, your soulmate did something that should concern you. They agreed to something they had previously refused. Don't skip, because the reason they finally said yes reveals just how carefully this trap was built. The person behind this knew exactly which emotional pressure to use. They discovered that your soulmate has been carrying a private fear about their future, especially the possibility of losing something important before they can build the life they truly want. So instead of asking for everything at once, this person created urgency. They suggested there was a limited opportunity, a private arrangement, something that had to be handled before other people became involved. Your soulmate almost walked away. In fact, there was one moment when they actually picked up their phone intending to contact someone they trusted and ask, "Does this sound right to you?" But they stopped. Why? Because the scammer had already planted another idea in their mind, that outsiders would misunderstand and possibly ruin the opportunity. That single suggestion isolated your soulmate at exactly the right moment. And what happened afterward is where this becomes deeply personal to you. Your soulmate handed over something valuable, not necessarily everything, and that is precisely why they still don't realize what may be happening. The first step was intentionally small enough to feel reversible. But shortly afterward, the promises began changing. New conditions appeared. Another request followed. Your soulmate became uncomfortable and finally asked a question the other person clearly wasn't expecting. For several seconds, there was no answer. Then came an explanation that sounded convincing on the surface but contradicted something your soulmate had been told earlier. That contradiction changed everything. Your soulmate went back through old messages, reread certain conversations, and noticed a pattern they had completely missed before. Dates didn't line up. One promise had quietly been rewritten. And one detail about the person's identity suddenly seemed impossible. Your soulmate is now beginning to suspect they were deliberately manipulated, but before they could confront anyone, they discovered something even more disturbing. This person may not have approached your soulmate randomly at all. Somehow, they already knew exactly what your soulmate cared about most. And there is one unanswered question about how they knew that, which could lead directly back to someone your soulmate already trusts. That realization stopped your soulmate cold, because the information this person possessed was never supposed to leave a very small circle. They knew about a private conversation from months ago. They knew about a decision your soulmate had been considering but had never announced publicly. Most unsettling of all, they seemed to know exactly when your soulmate would be emotionally vulnerable enough to listen. So your soulmate began looking backward instead of forward. They searched old messages, remembered conversations with friends, and mentally replayed moments when they had casually revealed pieces of their plans. One name kept appearing around those memories. Not because that person had obviously done anything wrong, but because they had been present at strangely convenient moments. Your soulmate didn't want to believe the connection. Then they found a message that made coincidence much harder to accept. The message itself looked ordinary. It was an old exchange with someone your soulmate trusted, written long before this suspicious opportunity appeared. But buried inside was a question that seemed innocent at the time. If someone could solve that problem for you, would you actually take the chance? Your soulmate had answered honestly, explaining what they feared, what they could afford to risk, and what would finally convince them to say yes. Now think about that carefully. Those exact emotional pressure points were later used by the person making the questionable offer. Even some of the wording was strangely similar. Your soulmate felt their stomach drop as they compared the conversations. Still, there was no proof that the trusted person had intentionally shared anything. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe your soulmate was connecting dots because they were frightened. But then another detail surfaced, one involving a phone call they were never supposed to know had happened. Your soulmate discovered that these two people may have communicated before the supposed first introduction ever occurred. Suddenly, the timeline looked completely different. The friendly recommendation. The urgent opportunity. The warnings not to involve outsiders. Even the carefully measured first request began to feel less spontaneous and more planned. But your soulmate did something smart. They didn't confront either person immediately. They acted normal. They asked one simple question about where their money, or valuable information, had actually gone, then waited to see what explanation came back. The response arrived quickly, almost too quickly, and contained a specific name your soulmate had never seen before. Stay till the end, because your soulmate searched that name expecting reassurance and instead uncovered something that changed the entire situation. The name appeared connected to several other complaints describing almost the exact same pattern, and one of those complaints mentioned someone frighteningly close to your soulmate's own circle. What your soulmate found next made it impossible to dismiss the warning as simple paranoia. One complaint described the same sequence almost step by step: a trusted introduction, a small initial commitment, sudden urgency, and then repeated pressure to provide more before the supposed opportunity disappeared. But there was one difference. That person had realized what was happening earlier and refused the second request. According to what your soulmate discovered, the friendly tone changed immediately afterward. Promises became excuses. Messages slowed down. Questions were avoided. Your soulmate stared at the screen, remembering how their own conversations had recently begun changing in exactly the same way. Then they noticed the date on that complaint. It existed long before anyone approached your soulmate, meaning somebody involved could have known there was already a pattern. And still allowed your soulmate to walk straight toward it. Instead of reacting emotionally, your soulmate decided to test the people involved. They sent two separate messages containing slightly different information about what they planned to do next. One version went to the person they had trusted from the beginning. The other went directly to the person behind the questionable arrangement. Then your soulmate waited. Hours passed without anything unusual. For a moment, they wondered whether they had become too suspicious. But late that evening, a message arrived from the scammer attempting to discourage your soulmate from doing something they had mentioned only in the private message sent to their trusted contact. Your soulmate read it twice. There was no reasonable way the scammer should have known that detail and less information was moving between them. And suddenly, the betrayal felt far bigger than whatever had already been handed over. Your soulmate still refused to reveal what they knew. That restraint mattered, because whoever was behind this apparently believed the manipulation was still working. Another message arrived promising that everything would be resolved if your soulmate completed just one final step. But this time, your soulmate recognized the pattern. They saved the conversations, preserved the details, and began carefully documenting what had happened instead of sending anything else. Then something unexpected appeared among those records, a detail from the very first interaction that had seemed meaningless until now. A particular phrase had been used by the scammer almost word for word before by someone your soulmate trusted. Not a common phrase. Not something easily explained away. Your soulmate suddenly understood that the connection might go much deeper than information being casually passed along. And just as they were putting those pieces together, the trusted person called unexpectedly and asked a question that revealed they already knew your soulmate had started investigating. The question sounded casual, but your soulmate immediately heard the tension underneath it. You haven't been looking into all of this on your own, have you? There was no reason for that person to ask unless somebody had told them about the investigation. Your soulmate kept their voice steady and pretended nothing was wrong, saying they were simply trying to understand a few confusing details. But the person began talking faster. They offered explanations your soulmate had never requested. They defended the arrangement before being accused of anything. And then came the mistake that exposed even more. They mentioned the complaint your soulmate had discovered online, even though your soulmate had never told them about it. For a moment, neither person spoke. That silence said more than any confession could have. Your soulmate now knew the information was traveling both ways, but they still didn't know why someone close to them would participate. Then the trusted person suddenly changed direction. Instead of defending the opportunity, they began warning your soulmate not to make this bigger than it needs to be. That sentence landed differently. Your soulmate asked one careful question. What exactly do you think I'm going to discover? Another silence followed. Then came a nervous laugh and an attempt to change the subject. Your soulmate didn't push. They ended the conversation politely and immediately wrote down everything that had been said. Minutes later, another message arrived from the supposed scammer offering to return part of what your soulmate had provided if they agreed to stop asking questions. That offer confirmed something important. People who genuinely believe they have done nothing wrong rarely become desperate to silence basic questions. But something huge was waiting inside the wording of that message, because one sentence suggested your soulmate had never been the only person being targeted. Your soulmate reread the sentence until its meaning became impossible to ignore. We can settle your situation separately from the others. The others. 2 words changed the entire investigation. Your soulmate began wondering how many people had been pulled into the same arrangement, and whether the trusted person had introduced them too. So they searched deeper, comparing names, dates, and fragments of information from the complaints they had already found. Slowly, another pattern emerged. Several victims seemed connected through overlapping friendships, recommendations, or professional circles. This wasn't random outreach. Someone appeared to be identifying people who were likely to trust a familiar introduction, then passing their vulnerabilities to the person running the scheme. But your soulmate found one name appearing near the beginning of multiple connections, and when they recognized who it belonged to, everything became painfully personal. Because this wasn't merely an acquaintance standing at the edge of their life. It was someone your soulmate had defended repeatedly. And someone who knew far more about your soulmate's feelings for you than anyone involved should ever have known. Your name being connected to this changed the way your soulmate looked at everything. Until that moment, they believed the scheme was centered on money, access, or whatever valuable thing the scammers could extract. Now another possibility emerged. Someone had been studying your soulmate's emotional life too. The person your soulmate had defended knew when they missed you, when they questioned the future, and when uncertainty made them easier to influence. They had listened patiently while your soulmate spoke about you, sometimes offering advice that seemed supportive. But looking back, your soulmate remembered several strange comments, suggestions to stop waiting, warnings that certain dreams with you might never happen, and subtle pressure to make major decisions quickly. Those comments had once sounded protective. Now they sounded like preparation. And your soulmate suddenly wondered whether the scam had required more than gaining their trust. It may have required weakening the one emotional connection that could have made them stop and question everything. So your soulmate performed another quiet test. They contacted the trusted person and deliberately said they were thinking about speaking with you before making any further decision. The reaction was immediate. "Why involve them?" came the response. Then another message followed, insisting that bringing you into the situation would only create unnecessary confusion. Your soulmate felt something shift inside. They hadn't accused anyone. They hadn't even said what they planned to tell you. Yet this person seemed deeply concerned about you learning anything. Don't skip, because your soulmate asked one deceptively simple question next. "What exactly are you afraid they'll tell me?" The message showed as read. No response came for several minutes. Then, instead of answering, the person called. Your soulmate let it ring. Seconds later, another call came from the person behind the suspicious arrangement. That timing was the confirmation your soulmate had been waiting for. Two people who supposedly had limited contact were suddenly reacting within seconds of each other because you might become involved. Your soulmate saved the call records and stopped answering both of them. Then something even stranger happened. A third person reached out, someone your soulmate had not spoken with in a long time, and said they had heard your soulmate was having doubts. Your soulmate froze. The circle was wider than expected. Rather than revealing anything, they asked where this person had heard that. The answer was vague, but one detail slipped through. They referred to a private meeting that your soulmate had never been told about. Apparently, several people connected to this situation had gathered before the original offer was ever presented. Your soulmate now understood that what looked like one persuasive individual might actually involve multiple people playing different roles. But the third person accidentally revealed something else about that meeting, something involving you. And it suggested the entire plan may have started after someone discovered your soulmate was preparing to make a major decision about your future together. The major decision your soulmate had been considering was something they had kept remarkably private. They had been thinking about ending a long period of uncertainty and finally moving toward the life they truly wanted with you. Nothing reckless. Nothing impulsive. Just a personal decision to stop allowing fear and outside opinions to control what happened next. But apparently, someone learned about it before your soulmate was ready to speak. According to the third person, the private meeting happened shortly afterward. That timing disturbed your soulmate because the suspicious opportunity appeared only days later, presented as something that could supposedly secure the future before any emotional decisions were made. Suddenly, the urgency made sense. Someone may have believed that if your soulmate became closer to you, their influence would disappear. So they needed your soulmate distracted, uncertain, and committed to something else before that could happen. Your soulmate began rebuilding the timeline from the beginning. Every conversation. Every introduction. Every moment someone encouraged them to keep things private. And one detail stood out. The trusted person had repeatedly asked whether your soulmate had spoken to you recently. At the time, those questions seemed like ordinary curiosity. Now they looked more like someone checking whether you had enough information to interfere. Your soulmate went further back and found another message sent shortly before the suspicious offer appeared. Whatever you decide about your personal life, make sure you protect yourself financially first. On its own, the sentence sounded reasonable. But combined with everything else, it appeared to guide your soulmate toward the exact arrangement that followed. Stay with this, because your soulmate finally realized there was one way to determine whether these people were reacting specifically to you. They sent one carefully worded message saying they had decided to tell you everything and would be speaking with you soon. Nothing more. Within minutes, the atmosphere changed. One person demanded to know what everything meant. Another insisted your soulmate was misunderstanding the situation. Then the trusted person sent the strangest message of all. Before you talk to them, give me one chance to explain why we did this. Your soulmate stared at that single word. No accusation had been made, yet the person had accidentally placed themselves inside whatever had happened. Your soulmate immediately saved the message, but before they could respond, it disappeared from the conversation. It was too late. The evidence had already been preserved. Then another message arrived, this time from an unfamiliar number. It contained no threat and no demand, only a warning that your soulmate should ask one specific question before trusting anyone's explanation. And the question pointed toward a hidden payment that could reveal who had actually benefited from the scam. The hidden payment was not large enough to attract attention at first glance, and that may have been exactly the point. The unfamiliar message told your soulmate to look at the date of the first transaction, then compare it with something that happened 2 days earlier. Your soulmate searched through old records and found it. The trusted person had suddenly changed their story about how they knew the individual behind the suspicious arrangement. Originally, they claimed the connection was distant, almost accidental. But 2 days before your soulmate committed anything, there had apparently been direct contact between them. Your soulmate couldn't see every detail, yet the timing was impossible to ignore. Even more revealing, the hidden payment seemed connected to a referral or introduction. That meant someone close to your soulmate may have received a benefit for bringing them into the situation. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. There was now a possible motive. But your soulmate still had one unanswered question: who sent the warning from the unfamiliar number? Instead of calling, they replied with only 4 words: "How do you know this?" The answer came several minutes later. The sender claimed they had once been approached through the same network and recognized the pattern before losing anything significant. They also claimed the trusted person had introduced more than one individual. Your soulmate remained cautious. A stranger's message was not proof. So they asked for something verifiable, one detail that had never been posted publicly. The sender responded with the exact wording of a promise your soulmate had received privately during the earliest conversations. Your soulmate's hands went still. Somebody outside the immediate exchange knew the script because apparently the same promise had been used before. Then the stranger revealed the detail nobody had expected. They said the people behind the scheme weren't simply choosing victims based on money. They were looking for people going through emotional transitions, people preparing to move, reconnect with someone, leave an unhealthy situation, or make a major commitment. Those moments created urgency and made carefully framed opportunities feel like solutions. Your soulmate suddenly saw why their feelings for you mattered so much. Their decision about you had created a deadline for someone else. Once your soulmate moved forward, the manipulation might stop working. But before your soulmate could ask another question, the stranger sent one final piece of information: a date, a location, and the name of the person who supposedly arranged the private meeting. Your soulmate recognized that name immediately. It belonged to someone who had repeatedly claimed they barely knew anything about the situation. And if the stranger was telling the truth, that person had been involved before your soulmate ever received the first offer. The name belonged to the same person who had spent weeks telling your soulmate to remain calm and stop questioning everyone's intentions. That was what made the discovery hurt. This person had positioned themselves as the neutral one, the reasonable voice who supposedly had nothing to gain. Yet the date and location from the stranger suggested they had been present when the plan was discussed. Your soulmate refused to rely on one person's claim, so they searched for independent confirmation. Then they remembered something small: a photograph posted around the date of that meeting. In the background was a recognizable location. Your soulmate compared it with the address they had been given, and their chest tightened. It matched. More importantly, 2 people connected to the suspicious arrangement were visible in that photograph together, despite later claiming they barely knew each other. The story your soulmate had been told was beginning to collapse under its own contradictions. Still, your soulmate needed to understand what the meeting had actually been about. They contacted the unfamiliar number again and asked why these people cared so much about the decision involving you. The answer was not immediate. When it finally arrived, it changed the emotional center of everything. According to the sender, your soulmate had been viewed as someone whose circumstances were about to change. If they reunited with you, committed to you, or simply began discussing major choices with you, they would become much harder to isolate. Someone had apparently said during that meeting that the window was closing. That word mattered. Window. This wasn't an opportunity created for your soulmate. Your soulmate may have been the opportunity. Their uncertainty, their private fears, and the possibility of a future with you had been turned into leverage. But one question remained: how could anyone know so much about conversations that happened behind closed doors? Your soulmate went back through months of messages looking for the answer, and eventually they noticed a pattern hiding in plain sight. Whenever they revealed something deeply personal to one particular person, some version of that information seemed to influence another conversation days later. Never exactly enough to be obvious. Just enough to guide your soulmate toward a certain decision. So they chose one final test. They told that person a completely false detail, something believable but specific, and waited. Less than an hour later, the person behind the questionable arrangement contacted your soulmate and referenced that exact false detail as though it were fact. There was no longer any reasonable doubt about where the information was traveling. But instead of confronting them, your soulmate replied with one sentence: "Interesting, because I never told you that." The message was read immediately. Then came silence. 5 minutes later, your soulmate received a frantic call from the trusted person, followed by a message containing 7 words that opened an entirely new mystery: "You don't understand who started all of this." Those 7 words changed the direction of your soulmate's investigation instantly. Until then, they had assumed the trusted person was either helping the scammer or benefiting from the introductions. But, who started all of this, suggested there was someone else above them. Someone who had remained invisible while everyone else played their assigned role. Your soulmate didn't respond immediately. They waited until the trusted person sent another message: "Should have told you sooner." Then another: "It wasn't supposed to go this far." That sentence mattered. It sounded less like denial and more like someone realizing they had lost control of something they once agreed to participate in. Your soulmate finally replied with a single question: "What exactly did you agree to?" The answer took nearly 20 minutes, and when it arrived, it revealed that the original plan had apparently been presented as something completely different. According to the trusted person, they had been told your soulmate simply needed encouragement toward a supposedly beneficial opportunity. They admitted sharing personal information, your soulmate's fears, financial boundaries, and emotional uncertainty. But claimed they believed it would help create an offer tailored to your soulmate's needs. Whether that explanation was truthful remained unclear. What mattered was what came next. The trusted person said they became suspicious after the requests kept increasing, but by then they were afraid to admit their involvement. Your soulmate asked about the hidden payment. Silence followed. Then came a reluctant confession: there had been a referral benefit. Suddenly, the motive was no longer theoretical. Yet the trusted person insisted the payment wasn't the real reason they participated. Someone had convinced them that if your soulmate moved forward with you too quickly, they would make a decision they might regret. And that someone had been feeding them information about you. Your soulmate felt the betrayal shift again. This wasn't only about stealing value from them. Someone had apparently been manipulating both sides of the situation. Telling your soulmate one story while telling people around them another. The trusted person finally provided the name of the individual who first approached them, but your soulmate didn't recognize it. That should have made the answer less frightening. Instead, it made everything stranger. Because when your soulmate searched the name alongside the details they had already uncovered, they found a connection to someone they knew extremely well. Not through friendship. Not through family. Through an old situation your soulmate believed had been completely finished long ago. Something huge is waiting for you, because this connection suggested the person orchestrating the scheme may have known about you before your soulmate ever mentioned you to the trusted friend. And buried inside an old exchange was one sentence indicating that the scam may have been designed not only to take something from your soulmate, but to prevent them from reaching you before a particular date. That particular date was only days away, and your soulmate suddenly understood why the pressure had intensified so quickly. Every request, every warning, every attempt to keep you out of the conversation seemed designed to force a decision before that deadline arrived. But what happened on that date? Your soulmate searched old messages, appointments, and conversations until one forgotten exchange caught their attention. Months earlier, they had mentioned that if nothing changed by this point in their life, they would stop waiting for perfect circumstances and finally speak honestly to you. Almost nobody knew that. Yet somehow, the people behind this scheme appeared to be working against the exact same clock. Your soulmate realized the scam may have depended on keeping them financially distracted and emotionally uncertain long enough to miss the moment they had privately chosen to move toward you. Instead of waiting for another explanation, your soulmate changed strategy. They stopped asking the trusted person questions and focused on the individual whose name had surfaced from that old situation. They compared dates, introductions, and saved conversations, looking for something concrete rather than assumptions. Then they found an overlooked connection. Shortly before the suspicious offer appeared, this individual had contacted someone inside your soulmate's circle under an innocent pretext. The conversation supposedly had nothing to do with your soulmate, yet within days, private details began traveling through the network. Your soulmate could finally see how the information chain might have started. One person gathered emotional details. Another created trust. Someone else presented the opportunity. Each person knew only enough to perform their role, making it difficult for your soulmate to see the full picture. But there was still one missing piece. Why was keeping your soulmate away from you so valuable? The answer began emerging when the trusted person finally sent something they had previously been afraid to share, a screenshot from an earlier conversation. Your soulmate studied it carefully. Most of it confirmed what they already suspected. Discussions about timing, vulnerability, and how to keep the arrangement private. But one sentence near the bottom was different. Someone had written, "Once they speak to that person, we lose control of the decision." That person was you. Your soulmate read the sentence again, realizing these people weren't merely worried you might expose suspicious details. They believed speaking with you would fundamentally change your soulmate's choice. Then your soulmate noticed the timestamp and the message immediately above it, partially visible in the screenshot. Only a few words could be read, but they were enough to introduce an entirely new question. Someone in the group claimed they had already spoken to you, or to someone pretending to represent you, before the scam ever began. Your soulmate stared at that partial message because it created a possibility they had never considered. If someone had truly spoken to you, why had nothing about that conversation ever reached them? And if nobody had spoken to you, then someone had deliberately used your identity to influence the plan. Your soulmate asked the trusted person for the complete screenshot. At first, there was resistance. Then the full image arrived. The missing sentence read, "We already know what their person would say, so make sure they never compare stories." Your soulmate felt the entire situation sharpen into focus. Nobody needed to control you. They only needed to control what your soulmate believed you thought. For months, subtle comments had suggested you were distant, uncertain, or unlikely to support your soulmate's choices. Now your soulmate began questioning whether some of those impressions had been manufactured from the beginning. They went back through every conversation in which someone had claimed to know something about your feelings. One person had said you were moving on. Another had suggested you would judge your soulmate for certain decisions. Someone else had casually implied that contacting you would only reopen old uncertainty. None of those statements had come directly from you. Your soulmate had accepted fragments, assumptions, and second-hand information because each piece arrived from someone they trusted. That was the emotional scam hidden underneath the other one. The suspicious arrangement created pressure, but misinformation about you helped keep your soulmate isolated inside that pressure. Then your soulmate discovered something especially revealing. 2 supposed updates about you had been sent within minutes of conversations where your soulmate had expressed doubts about continuing with the arrangement. Every time your soulmate moved toward questioning the scam, someone redirected their attention toward fear of losing you. Now your soulmate understood what they needed to do. Not retaliate. Not make accusations without proof. Simply remove the middlemen. They stopped asking other people what you supposedly thought and prepared to verify the truth directly. But before they could do that, the unfamiliar number contacted them again with one final warning. Check the first message about them before you reach out. Your soulmate searched back months until they found it, the earliest message in which someone claimed to have information about you. There was an attachment they had barely noticed at the time, a cropped screenshot supposedly proving what you had said. This time your soulmate examined the image carefully. The formatting looked normal until they compared it with another authentic message from the same period. One tiny detail didn't match. The timestamp spacing was wrong. And if that screenshot had been altered, then the lie about you began much earlier than anyone had admitted, possibly before your soulmate was ever approached about the suspicious opportunity. Your soulmate did not trust their eyes alone. They compared the questionable screenshot with several genuine messages from the same period, checking the layout, spacing, and sequence of the conversation. The more they looked, the less convincing it became. A line appeared to be missing between 2 messages. Part of the image had been cropped exactly where additional context should have appeared. Most importantly, nobody could provide the original conversation when your soulmate asked for it. The person who had first shared the screenshot suddenly claimed they no longer had access to the account. Another person insisted the image had come from somebody else. Responsibility began moving from one person to another the moment your soulmate requested something verifiable. That reaction told them more than another argument ever could. For months, your soulmate had been reacting emotionally to something they had never independently confirmed. Then your soulmate asked the trusted person a question that had been waiting underneath everything: who gave you the first information about them? This time, there was no quick answer. Eventually, a name arrived. The same individual connected to the old situation that had already surfaced in the investigation. Suddenly, the two sides of the mystery met. The questionable financial opportunity and the misleading information about you had not developed separately. They appeared to share an origin point. Your soulmate began seeing the strategy. Make them uncertain about you, convince them they needed to protect their future alone, then present a supposedly private opportunity at exactly the moment they felt most vulnerable. Whether every person involved understood the full plan was still uncertain, but the effect had been the same. Your soulmate had been pushed away from the person they wanted to trust while being pulled toward people who benefited from their confusion. And that realization created a completely different emotion inside your soulmate. The fear began turning into clarity. They stopped responding to pressure messages. They refused the so-called final step. They preserved everything they still had and decided that no second-hand story about you would influence another major decision. But just before they were ready to contact you directly, the trusted person sent one more piece of evidence, a longer conversation from before the scam began. Near the end was a message from the apparent organizer saying, they'll believe the screenshot because it confirms what they already fear. Your soulmate went silent reading those words. Whoever planned this had not merely known facts about their life. They had understood their deepest insecurity about you and intentionally built the deception around it. Yet the next line was even more revealing, because it named the person who had supplied that insecurity in the first place. And your soulmate never expected that name to appear. The name belonged to someone your soulmate had once trusted with conversations they never imagined would travel beyond that relationship. Not the obvious organizer. Not the person demanding another payment. Someone quieter, someone who had listened when your soulmate admitted what frightened them most about you. Your soulmate remembered telling this person, in a vulnerable moment, that their greatest fear wasn't rejection itself. It was reaching out, believing there was still something real between you, and discovering they had waited too long. That private fear had apparently become the blueprint. The altered screenshot suggested you had moved on. The warning suggested contacting you would bring disappointment. Then, while your soulmate was emotionally off balance, the questionable opportunity arrived promising control over at least one part of their future. Suddenly, every piece served the same purpose. Keep your soulmate afraid of verifying the truth with you. But there was something the people behind this had miscalculated. Once your soulmate understood how their fear had been used, that fear stopped controlling them in the same way. They contacted the person whose name had just surfaced and asked one precise question: "Did you ever tell anyone what I said about them?" The response came quickly: "I was only trying to help." Your soulmate hadn't accused them of sharing anything. That defensive answer was enough to push the conversation forward. After several careful questions, the person admitted discussing your soulmate's emotional situation with someone else, but insisted they never expected it to become part of a scam. They claimed they thought they were helping friends understand why your soulmate was vulnerable. Then they revealed another detail. The organizer had repeatedly asked whether your soulmate would change their mind if they received direct reassurance from you. That question exposed the organizer's biggest concern. It wasn't simply that you might recognize suspicious behavior. They believed your voice carried enough emotional weight to break the entire illusion. Your soulmate finally understood why every path seemed designed to prevent direct contact between you. But before they could act, another message arrived from the trusted person containing a document they had secretly saved. It appeared to outline the sequence of conversations leading up to the original offer, including who would make contact and when. Most names were shortened or disguised, but beside your soulmate's entry was a handwritten note, "Must happen before they reconnect." Underneath that sentence was another date, earlier than the deadline your soulmate had already discovered. Your soulmate recognized it immediately. It was the exact day they had almost reached out to you months ago but changed their mind after